They say silence is golden, but they forget that silence can also be the sound of a storm gathering its strength, the deep, patient inhale of the ocean before it unleashes a tsunami. In the glass and steel towers of corporate America, where ambition is the only true currency, the quiet endurance of the wronged is often mistaken for acceptance. It is a fatal miscalculation. Inside the main boardroom of untold Corp, high above the sprawling grid of New York City, the air was electric with anticipation. This was the heart of the empire, a room where fortunes were made or lost with a single presentation. And on this day, Marcus Thorne, the charismatic director of innovation, was having the performance of his life. He stood before the board, a master of his universe, his voice smooth and confident as he unveiled what he called his masterpiece, Project Chimera. It was a revolutionary AI platform, a system so advanced it promised to redefine their industry and secure Athelred's dominance for the next decade. The board members, titans of finance and technology, leaned forward, captivated. They saw in Marcus the future of their company. But 20 floors below, in a dimly lit corner of the open-plan office, Alara Vance watched the same presentation on a flickering internal feed. Her face, reflected in the cold blue light of the monitor, was a mask of placid neutrality, but her eyes held a chilling emptiness. Every word Marcus spoke was a syllable stolen from her soul. Every elegant slide showcasing Chimera's architecture was a blueprint copied from her mind, a dream she had built during countless sleepless nights. The project wasn't just code and algorithms to her. It was a living thing, a piece of her very being. As Marcus paused for dramatic effect before revealing the projected profits, a different set of words echoed in Alara's memory, far louder than the applause from the boardroom. His words, spoken to her just 1 week ago, in the sterile quiet of his office, after he had locked her out of her own creation. The memory was sharp, a shard of glass in her mind. "Don't be so precious, Alara," he had said, a dismissive smirk playing on his lips. "In this company, everyone is replaceable." Replaceable. The word didn't just sting. It had cauterized a part of her. It had burned away the naive belief that hard work and dedication would be enough. But it had not broken her. Instead, it had forged something new in the ashes of her betrayal. As she watched Marcus soak in the admiration of the powerful, a cold, serene certainty settled over her. He had stolen her work, erased her name, and dismissed her existence. He thought he had buried her under the weight of his ambition. He was about to learn that you cannot bury a seed and not expect it to grow. The storm was no longer gathering. It had arrived, and it was waiting silently, patiently, for the perfect moment to strike. To understand the depth of the betrayal, you must first understand the purity of the dream. Alara Vance was not born in the concrete canyons of New York. She was a product of the quiet, sprawling plains of the Midwest, a small town where the sky was the biggest thing you could see, and ambition was usually measured by the yield of the season's harvest. From a young age, however, Alara's world was not one of soil and sun, but of logic and light. She found a different kind of nature inside the humming beige box of her family's first computer. For her, code was not a sterile set of instructions, it was poetry. It was a language that could build worlds from nothing, create order from chaos, and solve problems with an elegance that felt like magic. Her parents, a mechanic and a school teacher, didn't fully understand her passion, but they understood her dedication. They saw the glow of the monitor on her face late into the night and knew she was building something, even if they didn't know what. It was for them, for the quiet pride in their eyes when she won a full scholarship to a prestigious tech university, that she pushed herself. It was for them that she packed her life into 2 suitcases and moved to the city that never slept, determined to build a future that would make their sacrifices worthwhile. Athelred Corp was less of a company and more of a monument to modern capitalism. Its obsidian tower pierced the clouds, a declaration of dominance in the city's skyline. For a newcomer like Alara, it was profoundly intimidating. The people moved with a sharp, predatory grace, their conversations a rapid-fire volley of acronyms and stock prices. She felt small, anonymous, just another cog in an impossibly vast machine. She kept her head down, focused on her work, and produced code that was not just functional, but flawless. It was clean, efficient, and years ahead of what was expected from a junior programmer. And then, Marcus Thorne noticed. Marcus was everything Alara was not. He was a supernova of charisma in a universe of quiet, diligent stars. He didn't write code, he orchestrated it. He conducted meetings like a symphony, his words weaving grand narratives of innovation and disruption that left everyone, from the interns to the senior executives, mesmerized. He had a reputation for spotting and nurturing talent, for being a kingmaker within the company. One afternoon, Alara was summoned to his corner office on the 48th floor. The view alone was enough to make her dizzy. Marcus wasn't sitting behind his large mahogany desk. He was standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows, holding a tablet displaying her work. He didn't speak of syntax or efficiency. He spoke of vision. "This isn't just code, Alara," he had said, his voice a low, conspiratorial murmur. "This is architecture. This is art. I haven't seen a mind like yours in a very long time." In that moment, he became more than a boss. He became her champion. He gave her resources, protected her from corporate bureaucracy, and filled her head with promises of changing the world. He made her feel seen. He made her feel indispensable. If Marcus was the sun in her new corporate solar system, Chloe was the earth beneath her feet. Chloe Dubois was a marketing analyst, a sharp, witty New Orleans transplant who understood the unwritten rules of the office in a way Alara never could. Their friendship began, as most office friendships do, in the shared foxhole of their adjacent cubicles. It was forged in knowing glances over the tops of monitors during mind-numbing conference calls, and solidified over cheap takeout eaten at their desks long after everyone else had gone home. Chloe was her translator for the complex social codes of Aethelred. She was the one who explained which vice president to avoid in the elevator, whose coffee to never accidentally take, and why you should never, ever stand between the sales team and their quarterly bonuses. Their bond went deeper than office survival tactics. Chloe was the person Alara called when an algorithm finally worked after a week of failures. Alara was the person Chloe vented to when her own boss, a man with the imagination of a brick, shot down another one of her creative campaign ideas. They shared dreams over lunch in a tiny, crowded park, a small patch of green amidst the gray. Alara spoke of building systems that could help people, that could make life more efficient, more connected. Chloe dreamed of creating campaigns that were more than just ads, stories that made people feel something genuine. There was a time, early on, when another manager had tried to casually claim one of Alara's innovative debugging tools as his own in a team meeting. Before Alara could even process the injustice, Chloe had spoken up, her voice light but firm. "That's fantastic, Bill," she had said with a bright smile. "Alara was showing me the beta for that last week. The way she designed that recursive function is just brilliant, isn't it?" Bill had stammered, corrected himself, and the moment passed. But for Alara, it was monumental. In a place where everyone was fighting for their own territory, Chloe had guarded hers. From that day on, her trust in Chloe was absolute. This was Alara's world, the foundation upon which her ambitions were built. It was a triumvirate of perceived perfection. There was Marcus, the visionary mentor, who saw her potential and gave her the sky to build in. There was Chloe, the loyal friend, who kept her grounded and safe. And there was Alara herself, the architect, the dreamer, pouring every ounce of her talent and energy into her work, secure in the belief that she was supported, protected, and valued. She believed she had found that rarest of things in the cutthroat landscape of New York, a place where she belonged. She looked at Marcus and saw a leader. She looked at Chloe and saw a sister. She saw a future as bright and limitless as the city skyline outside her window. She had no idea that the foundation she was standing on was nothing but a carefully constructed mirage, and the ground was already beginning to crumble beneath her feet. The birth of Project Chimera was not an assignment that came down from on high. It was not born in a sterile, scheduled brainstorming session with whiteboards and stale donuts. It began as an obsession, a persistent, nagging question in the back of Alara Vance's mind. In her work, maintaining some of Aethelred's logistical software, she saw a system that was fundamentally broken. The entire multi-trillion-dollar global supply chain, she realized, was a creature of reaction. A storm would hit, a port would strike, a political crisis would erupt, and only then would the frantic, costly scramble to reroute and reschedule begin. The system was always looking in the rearview mirror. Ilara's question was simple, but its implications were revolutionary. What if you could teach a machine to look forward? What if you could build a system that didn't just track data, but could understand its rhythm, its pulse, and predict the future? The idea crystallized late one night. Fueled by coffee and a restless intellect, she sketched the initial concept onto a napkin in a 24-hour diner. It was a neural network that would ingest a constant torrential stream of global data, weather patterns, political news, social media sentiment, market fluctuations, shipping manifests, and learn to see the invisible threads connecting them. It would be a system that could warn a company that a typhoon, forming over the Pacific, would delay their shipment of microchips in 3 weeks, allowing them to reroute before the first gust of wind had even formed. She nervously brought the scribbled-on napkin to Marcus Thorne, half expecting to be dismissed. Marcus didn't see the code. He didn't understand the complexities of machine learning. But he had an unerring instinct for one thing: power. As Ilara explained her vision, he saw the dollar signs, the patents, the promotions. He saw a weapon that could make Ethelred Corp invincible. He immediately classified it as a top-secret blue sky initiative, giving Ilara a small, unused conference room and a dedicated server. "This is our secret, Ilara," he told her, his voice low and exciting. "No red tape, no committees, just you, your mind, and my protection. You build it, and I will clear the path for you." It felt like the ultimate vote of confidence. In reality, it was the first wall he built around her, isolating her and her creation from the rest of the company. That conference room became Ilara's entire world. She called it the cauldron. The glass walls were soon covered in a chaotic tapestry of complex algorithms, flowcharts, and scrawled notes that no one else could decipher. Day and night bled into one another, marked only by the rising and setting of the sun outside her window. The world outside the cauldron grew muffled and distant. She lived on lukewarm coffee, vending machine snacks, and the pure, exhilarating adrenaline of creation. This was not work, it was a calling. She was teaching a new form of consciousness to exist. She would spend days wrestling with a single line of code, a stubborn bug that refused to yield, only to have the solution appear to her in a dream. She would wake up, rush to the office at 3 a.m., and implement the fix, feeling a surge of triumph that was more potent than any drug. In this self-imposed exile, Chloe was her only regular visitor, her lifeline to humanity. She would appear with 2 cups of coffee in the morning or a box of pizza late at night, a cheerful interruption to the intense silence. She was the project's first and only audience. Ilara would try to explain the technical marvels, the elegance of a self-correcting algorithm, and Chloe, in her own brilliant way, would translate it into human terms. "So, you're not just building a better GPS," Chloe said one night, staring at a wall of code. "You're building a crystal ball. A crystal ball for capitalism." It was Chloe who helped name it. "It's made of so many different parts that shouldn't work together," she mused, looking at the diagrams connecting predictive analytics, logistics, and data mining. "It's like one of those mythical beasts, a chimera." The name was perfect. It captured the strange, powerful, and slightly monstrous nature of what Ilara was building. Ilara trusted Chloe implicitly, sharing every breakthrough, every setback, every secret of Chimera's digital DNA. Marcus, by contrast, kept his distance. He would visit the cauldron perhaps once a week, always impeccably dressed, a stark contrast to Ilara's perpetual uniform of a hoodie and jeans. He never asked about the technical details. His questions were always strategic. "What's the timeline for the predictive engine's first test run? Summarize the key milestones you've hit this week in 3 bullet points for me. Can you create a high-level visual that I can use to tease the concept to the board?" He framed himself as her champion, the one who would translate her genius into a language the executives could understand. He required a detailed progress report emailed to him every Friday evening, without fail. "I need the ammunition to fight for your budget, Alara," he'd say with a charming smile. "Let me be your shield so you can stay focused on the magic." And she believed him. She diligently sent the reports, detailing every success, every line of proprietary code she wrote, every innovative solution she devised. She was handing him the story of Chimera, piece by piece, never realizing he was carefully editing her out of the narrative. After 18 months of relentless work, the moment arrived. It was nearly 4 a.m. on a Tuesday. The office was a ghost town. Alara ran the final simulation, a massive test involving a year's worth of historical data. She watched, her heart pounding, as Chimera's core AI processed the information, its virtual synapses firing. And then, the results began to populate the screen. It correctly predicted 94% of all major supply chain disruptions, from factory fires in Bangladesh to shipping crew strikes in California, often weeks in advance. It was more accurate than any human analyst could ever hope to be. It worked. It was alive. A wave of pure, unadulterated joy washed over Alara, so intense it brought tears to her eyes. She had done it. She had built the impossible. The first person she texted, her fingers trembling with excitement, was Chloe. "It's alive!" The first email she sent, attaching the full, groundbreaking simulation report, was to Marcus with the subject line, "We did it." In that perfect moment of victory, standing alone in the silent office, she felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude for her visionary boss and her faithful friend. They were her team. They were her partners. And together, they were about to change the world. The success of the simulation was a seismic event, an underground tremor that only 3 people felt. For weeks, the energy of it buzzed between them. Now, it was time to let the tremors reach the surface. Marcus announced that he would be presenting the initial concept of Chimera to a select group of department heads. It was an internal, strategic meeting, a first step in getting the other branches of the company to understand the tidal wave that was coming. "You should be there, Alara," he had said, clapping a hand on her shoulder. "Just to observe, and to be on hand in case any of the tech guys try to get into the weeds. You're my secret weapon." She had beamed, proud to be included, to be his weapon. The idea of finally seeing her creation unveiled, even to a small audience, was thrilling. She spent the night before the meeting unable to sleep, a mix of nervous energy and the pride of a parent about to watch their child's first recital. The conference room on the 35th floor was an exercise in corporate minimalism. A long, polished table, black leather chairs, and a state-of-the-art projection system. The heads of sales, marketing, and operations were there, people whose faces Alara recognized, but whose names she barely knew. They exuded an aura of casual power, their conversation a blend of golf scores and market share percentages. Alara found a seat in the corner, feeling like a scientist invited to a meeting of poets. She clutched a tablet containing the entire technical specification of Chimera, ready to answer any question that might come her way. Chloe was there too, sitting closer to the main table, tasked with taking notes on marketing angles. She gave Alara a quick, encouraging smile. Marcus began, and he was magnificent. He didn't talk about code or servers. He spoke of the future. He painted a vivid picture of Ethelred's new era of dominance, all thanks to a revolutionary predictive analytics platform. The room was hooked. Then, he moved to the core of the presentation, the part that explained how it all worked. A slide appeared on the massive screen behind him, a beautiful, simplified schematic of what Alara had internally named the Nexus algorithm. It was the heart of Chimera, the elegant, almost sentient piece of code that allowed the system to learn and predict. It was her single greatest professional accomplishment, an intellectual puzzle that had consumed her for 6 straight months. Now, the central challenge, the problem everyone in our industry has failed to solve, Marcus said, his voice dropping to a more intimate, conspiratorial tone, was how to make the system truly predictive, not just reactive. I wrestled with this for weeks, poring over every existing model. They were all fundamentally flawed. He paused, letting the drama build. Alara leaned forward, her heart swelling with pride, ready for him to introduce her as the architect of the solution. And then, Marcus continued, a look of thoughtful reminiscence on his face. One evening, in my study, it struck me. The solution wasn't a more complex linear analysis. The solution was to create a multi-vector, symbiotic feedback loop, to treat data not as a river, but as a weather system. I sketched out the foundational concept on a legal pad that night, and from that sketch, the Nexus algorithm was born. It's the secret sauce. It is the engine that drives all of this. The words hit Alara with the physical force of a punch. The air left her lungs. The voices in the room, the low hum of the air conditioning, it all faded into a distant, roaring buzz. My study? A legal pad? She felt a dizzying sense of vertigo, as if the floor had suddenly tilted. It was a lie. It was a clean, bold, effortless lie. The Nexus algorithm hadn't been born in his study. It had been born in the cauldron at 4 a.m. after a 72-hour marathon of coding, fueled by nothing but coffee and sheer force of will. The foundational concept wasn't sketched on a legal pad. It was mapped across 3 glass walls, a chaotic symphony of equations that only she could read. He had taken her most profound moment of creation and remade it in his own image, writing himself into the starring role. She looked around the room. The other executives were nodding, impressed. Of course they were. It was a great story. A story of a brilliant leader's singular vision. The rest of the meeting passed in a blur. When it ended, Marcus was swarmed by his colleagues, all of them eager to congratulate him on his breakthrough. Alara slipped out of the room, her hands feeling cold and numb. She needed an anchor. She needed Chloe. She found her friend by the coffee machine, who was beaming. That went well, didn't it? They were eating out of his hand. Chloe, Alara began, her voice barely a whisper. Did you hear what he said in there, about the Nexus algorithm? He said he invented it. Chloe stopped smiling. She didn't look at Alara. Instead, she began fussing with the coffee machine, wiping away a non-existent spill. Oh, Alara, she said, her voice a little too bright, a little too dismissive. Don't be so literal about everything. It's just corporate speak. Corporate speak? Chloe, he took my work, my breakthrough, and claimed it was his. That's not speak, that's theft. Chloe finally turned, but her eyes didn't quite meet Alara's. There was a new hardness in them, a pragmatism that felt like a slammed door. Look, she said, lowering her voice. Marcus is the director. He's the face of the project. He's the one who has to go to war for us with the board. He needs to project complete ownership and confidence. It makes the project look stronger. It makes him look stronger. But it's not true, Alara insisted, a desperate edge to her voice. She felt like she was speaking a language Chloe no longer understood. Truth? What does truth matter in that room? Chloe sighed, a sound of weary impatience. This is how the game is played. You're the genius behind the curtain. He's the wizard on the stage. It's a symbiotic relationship. When he wins, the project wins, and eventually, we all win. You need to start seeing the bigger picture. The phrase "we all win" hung in the air, feeling hollow and false. The friendship, which Alara had thought was a solid, unshakable thing, now felt fragile, riddled with cracks. The theft of her work had been a shock, but the defense of that theft by her closest friend was a deep, chilling wound. It was the first time Alara truly understood that she was alone. The shadow of doubt was no longer just a shadow. It was a cold, living thing, and it had begun to wrap itself around her heart. She told herself Chloe was just being practical, that this was a single, insignificant incident. But she knew, with a certainty that frightened her, that it was not. It was just the beginning. The weeks following the strategy meeting were shrouded in a cold, professional mist. The easy warmth that had once defined Alara's relationship with Chloe had evaporated, leaving behind a brittle politeness. Their conversations were now confined to work-related necessities, their shared lunches a thing of the past. Chloe was often seen with Marcus, walking down the hallways in deep conversation, a member of an inner circle to which Alara no longer had access. Alara retreated into the only place she felt truly in control, the world of code. She buried herself in the final, intricate layers of Chimera, polishing its systems, strengthening its firewalls, and adding elegant features that no one had even asked for. The work was a comfort, a place where logic reigned and betrayal had no syntax. She told herself that what happened in the meeting was a misunderstanding, a political maneuver she was too naive to comprehend. But the lie lingered, a splinter in her mind she couldn't quite remove. Marcus Thorne was an expert reader of people, and he could sense the distance. He knew that a disgruntled genius was a liability, especially when that genius held the keys to his impending triumph. He couldn't risk Alara becoming an obstacle, not when the project was 99% complete. He needed her to see the finish line, to willingly carry the project over it, and to hand it to him with a smile. And so, he decided to do what he did best: sell a beautiful, irresistible dream. He summoned her to his office once more. This time, the atmosphere was different. There was no pretense of a casual mentorship chat. The lights were slightly dimmed, and he had a bottle of expensive sparkling water open on his desk. It felt staged, theatrical. He began with a masterstroke of manipulation, addressing the source of her unease head-on. "Alara," he said, his voice a carefully calibrated blend of sincerity and authority. "I know you were unsettled by the department head meeting. I saw it on your face." He leaned forward, creating an illusion of confidence. "What you need to understand is that a room like that is a shark tank. They would have torn the project apart with questions of budget and oversight if they saw it as the work of a junior team member. I had to present it as a singular, top-down vision. I had to become the lightning rod, the sole point of authority, to protect it, to protect you." He let that sink in, framing his theft as an act of chivalry. Then he pivoted to the future. "But that was just a temporary strategy," he continued, his eyes gleaming. "Because of that meeting's success, I've been able to do something I've wanted to do for a long time. I've convinced the board that this company's future doesn't lie with managers like me. It lies with creators like you." He walked over to his monitor and turned it towards her. On the screen was a draft of a new organizational chart. At the top of a newly created department called the Innovation Hub was a box with a new title: Chief Technical Architect. "This isn't just a promotion, Alara," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "It's a throne, a role I designed with only you in mind. The Chief Technical Architect will have complete creative control, a dedicated team, and a budget that will make the other departments weep. You won't be behind the curtain anymore. You'll be the one designing the entire stage. This was always the end game. I just needed Chimera to be the key to unlock it." Alara stared at the screen, her heart hammering against her ribs. Chief Technical Architect. The words seemed to shimmer with an impossible light. It was more than she had ever dreamed of. It was validation. It was authority. It was recognition. A voice, small and weary in the back of her mind, whispered, "It's a lie. He lied before, he's lying now." But another voice, a voice desperate for her faith to be rewarded, shouted it down. This was the explanation. This was the bigger picture Chloe had told her to see. Marcus wasn't a thief, he was a chess master, and she was his queen, being maneuvered into a position of ultimate power. The relief was so overwhelming, so intoxicating, that it left no room for doubt. I don't know what to say," she stammered. "Say you accept," Marcus said smoothly, a triumphant smile spreading across his face. "Yes," she breathed. "Of course, yes. Excellent." He returned to his desk, his demeanor shifting subtly from visionary to administrator. "Now, for the final steps. To make the official proposal to the board, I need to present Chimera as a complete, secured, and transferable corporate asset. It has to be airtight." He began to tick off items on his fingers. "I need the final, fully commented source code, all technical documentation and user guides. And most critically, I need all administrative passwords, root keys, and any backdoors you built in for testing. We have to migrate the entire project from the development servers to the executive vault under my director-level credentials. It's a standard security protocol for an asset of this value. A formality, really, before we can announce your new position." Each request felt logical, a necessary piece of corporate procedure. She saw it not as a surrender of control, but as a graduation. Back in the familiar solitude of the cauldron, she began the process. It was a strange, almost ceremonial task. She meticulously organized folders, annotated lines of code, and documented every password and encryption key. It felt like packing up a home she had lived in for years. With each step, she felt a pang of nostalgia, a sense of letting go, but it was overshadowed by the brilliant promise of her future. Finally, there was only one thing left to do: initiate the full asset transfer to the executive server. She typed the command, her fingers moving confidently across the keyboard. A dialog box appeared on the screen. Initiate full transfer of Project Chimera. This action is irreversible and will transfer all ownership and access rights. She took a deep breath and clicked Execute. A progress bar appeared, a silent green line moving from left to right, carrying her life's work away from her. She watched it, a quiet hum from the server rack the only sound in the room. When it reached 100%, a soft chime echoed in the silence. The progress bar vanished, and in its place, a single line of red text appeared on her terminal. Access to directory divided by Chimera, divided by has been revoked. Her ownership was gone. Her access was gone. For a fleeting second, a cold dread washed over her. She felt an instinctual urge to undo it, to pull it back, but she couldn't. It was done. She quickly pushed the feeling away, telling herself this was just procedure. This was the necessary step before her ascension. She was no longer the keeper of Chimera. She was its creator, soon to be crowned. She had handed over the keys, confident she was about to be handed a crown. She had no idea she had just armed her own executioner. With the final transfer complete, a strange and unsettling quiet fell over Alara's world. The frantic, obsessive energy that had fueled her for nearly 2 years was gone, replaced by a profound sense of waiting. She was an architect whose magnum opus was finished, locked away in a vault, waiting for the grand unveiling. She waited for news of the board proposal, for the announcement of her new role as chief technical architect, for the future that Marcus had promised her. After 3 days of near silence, an email from Marcus finally arrived. It wasn't the formal offer she was expecting, but an invitation. He was taking the core team to dinner at a high-end restaurant downtown to celebrate the project's completion. A final toast to the incredible journey, the email read, and to the brilliant people who made it happen. The phrase core team sent a small spark of joy through her. It felt inclusive. It felt right. She accepted immediately, seeing the dinner as the symbolic end of one chapter and the beginning of the next. The restaurant was loud, expensive, and impersonal. It was a place for closing deals, not for celebrating camaraderie. The air hummed with the aggressive energy of finance and power. Marcus was already there, holding court at a circular table in the center of the room. And right beside him, so close their shoulders were almost touching, was Chloe. They were laughing at something on Marcus's phone when Alara arrived. The table was set for 3. A cold, prickling sensation ran down Alara's spine. She had assumed others from the periphery would be their testers, analysts, but it was just them. The triumvirate. Only, it didn't feel like a team. It felt like a couple, and their third wheel. Marcus stood to greet her, a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Alara, glad you could make it. Have a seat." He gestured to the chair directly opposite him, placing the entire width of the table between them. The dinner was a masterclass in psychological exclusion. Marcus and Chloe drove the conversation, their rapport seamless and exclusionary. They spoke of the future, but it was a future Alara couldn't seem to find a place in. "The presentation for the executive committee is next week," Marcus said to Chloe. "I'll need you to prep the marketing one-sheet. Focus on the disruption angle." "Already on it," Chloe replied, her eyes bright with ambition. "I've got some ideas for the internal comms strategy too. We need to frame this as a victory for your entire directorate." They spoke in a language of we and our, a shared territory of ambition where Alara was a tourist. She tried to join in, to offer a technical insight or a suggestion for future upgrades. "We could probably increase the predictive accuracy by another 2% if we integrate real-time maritime tracking data," she offered during a brief lull. Marcus looked at her, a patient, almost patronizing smile on his face. "That's a good thought, Ilara. A very technical thought. We'll definitely keep that in mind for phase 2. He then immediately turned back to Chloe, dismissing the idea without a second thought. It was a conversational pat on the head, a gesture to the help. The lowest point came with the toast. After the main course, Marcus stood, holding his wine glass aloft. "I want to propose a toast," he announced, his voice carrying over the restaurant's din, "to Project Chimera, a project that will not only change this company, but our entire industry." He paused, looking around the table, and to the people who made it possible. His eyes met Chloe's. To Chloe, whose strategic insights have been invaluable from day one. Then, his gaze shifted to Ilara. There was no warmth in it, only a cool, detached appraisal. And, of course, to Ilara Vance. Without a doubt, the most dedicated and brilliant coder I have ever had the pleasure of working with. Her technical execution of the core engine was absolutely foundational to getting us to where we are today. We literally could not have built this without her. The words were praise, but the tense was poison. Was foundational. Could not have built. He spoke of her contributions as if laying a wreath on a tombstone. It was a eulogy for a job well done, for a role that was now firmly in the past. He said nothing of the future, nothing of the innovation hub, nothing of the chief technical architect. The promise that had been her guiding star for weeks was absent, a black hole in the conversation. Chloe raised her glass, her smile unwavering, and repeated the toast. Ilara could barely lift her own glass. The wine tasted like ash. She walked home alone, the city lights a blurry, indifferent smear. The dinner had been a performance, and she had been the unwitting audience to her own erasure. She spent the night wrestling with a rising tide of panic, trying to suppress it with logic. He's waiting for the board's final sign-off. He can't announce my new role publicly yet. It's just corporate protocol. She clung to these rationalizations like a drowning woman clinging to a piece of driftwood. The next morning, the world ended, not with a bang, but with a quiet, digital beep. She arrived at the Ethelred Tower, her mind still foggy from a sleepless night. She swiped her ID badge at the security turnstile. A red light flashed, a harsh electronic buzz. The gate remained locked. Access denied. A flicker of confusion, then embarrassment. The security guard looked at her with pity. "Card might be demagnetized," he offered, though they both knew it wasn't true. "You'll have to call IT from the lobby." Standing in the cold, marble expanse of the lobby, a place she had walked through 1,000 times, she felt a sudden, chilling premonition. She pulled out her phone, her fingers fumbling, and tried to log into her work email. Authentication failed. "Please contact your system administrator." Ice flowed through her veins. This wasn't a glitch. This was a purge. Every door, physical and digital, had been sealed. She was in exile. At that precise moment, her phone vibrated with an incoming mail notification, not to her work account, which no longer existed, but to her personal one. The sender was Marcus Thorne. The subject line was, "Next Steps." For a wild, insane second, hope flared. She opened it. The email was 3 sentences long, each one a perfectly crafted, brutally impersonal nail in the coffin of her career. Ilara. For a long time, Ilara just stood in the lobby, the phone clutched in her hand like a piece of wreckage. The world moved around her in a blur of motion and noise, but her own universe had shrunk to the glowing words on the screen. Concluded. Reassignment. Legacy systems. The shock was a physical thing, a crushing weight on her chest. But then, through the ice of that shock, a crack appeared, and something white-hot began to surge through her veins. It was rage. A pure, clarifying rage that burned away the disbelief and the despair. She was not going to be reassigned. She was not going to be shuffled off to a corporate graveyard like a piece of obsolete hardware. She had built a kingdom, and she would not be exiled from it without looking the usurper in the eye. Her badge was useless. The turnstiles were a digital fortress she could no longer pass. But Marcus had made one critical error. He had left one traitorous pawn on the board. She found a quiet corner of the lobby and dialed Chloe's number. Her voice, when she spoke, was an instrument of perfect control, laced with a convincing manufactured panic. "Chloe, it's Alara. Thank God I reached you. There's a problem, a huge one." She paused, letting the silence hang. "The ChronoSync module in the core algorithm. It has a recursive dependency on the old development server's clock. I hard-coded it as a temporary fix weeks ago, and I forgot to remove it. If the executive server is on a different sync cycle, the entire project could suffer cascading data corruption within hours. I can't get upstairs. You have to get me to a terminal. Now." It was a brilliant lie, a cascade of technical jargon so specific and plausible that Chloe, whose technical knowledge was superficial at best, wouldn't dare question it. She was leveraging Chloe's own ambition against her. The thought of Marcus's pet project failing before its grand debut would be her worst nightmare. As predicted, Chloe was downstairs in under 2 minutes, her face pale with anxiety. "What happened? I thought it was finished," she hissed, swiping her own badge to let Alara through the gate. The elevator ride to the 48th floor was a study in unbearable tension. Chloe fired off a series of panicked questions about servers and sync cycles, her voice high and strained. Alara remained silent, her eyes fixed on the floor indicator, her entire being focused into a single, sharp point of intent. The calm fury inside her was so absolute it felt like peace. When the doors slid open, Chloe gestured frantically towards the bank of workstations. "Hurry, which one do you need?" Alara walked right past them, her steps making no sound on the plush carpet, and headed directly for the frosted glass door of Marcus Thorne's office. She didn't knock. He was on the phone, his back to the door, admiring his panoramic view of the city. He turned as she entered, and for a fraction of a second, his smooth composure faltered. But he recovered instantly, ending his call with a calm, "Something's come up. I'll call you back." He placed the phone down and gestured to the chair opposite his desk. "I had a feeling you'd be paying a visit," he said, his voice devoid of any emotion. Chloe hovered in the doorway, her face a mask of confusion and dawning horror as she realized she'd been played. "Legacy systems, Marcus?" Alara's voice was low, but it cut through the quiet of the office. "Is that the throne we talked about? Or was that just the cheese in the trap?" Marcus steepled his fingers, the picture of a man in complete control. "Alara, your emotions are understandable, but you're not seeing the corporate reality. The chief technical architect role was a strategic possibility, one that the executive committee decided wasn't viable at this time. Business needs change." "Business needs?" A raw, incredulous laugh escaped her lips. "Don't hide behind that corporate garbage. You looked me in the eye and sold me a future you had no intention of delivering. You did it to get the keys, to get the final code. You lied. I incentivized a key employee to complete a critical project ahead of schedule," he countered, his voice as cold and hard as the polished glass of his desk. "I did my job." "Your job?" Her voice rose, the fury finally breaking through her control. "Project Chimera is not your job. It came from my mind, from my hands. Every line of code, every algorithm, every single breakthrough was mine." This, finally, seemed to amuse him. A slow, condescending smile spread across his face. He stood up, walking around the desk to stand over her, a posture of pure dominance. "You built a very impressive engine, Alara. I'll grant you that," he said, his voice soft and venomous. "But you're making a classic, sentimental mistake. You're confusing the labor with the vision. You were a pair of hands, a brilliant, tireless pair of hands. But this city is filled with hands, Alara. It is filled with talent. Talent is a commodity, something to be bought and used." He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a whisper that was louder than a shout. "You were a tool, a very effective one. And when the house is built, the hammer goes back in the toolbox. It doesn't get a seat in the dining room." He took another step, his shadow falling over her. "So let me give you one final piece of mentorship on the house. Never, ever mistake yourself for being indispensable. In this company, in this world, everyone is replaceable." The word hung in the air, a poison dart that found its mark. replaceable. It was designed to be the killing blow, the final, crushing weight to extinguish any last ember of her defiance. Throughout it all, she had allowed her gaze to flicker towards the doorway, towards Chloe, who stood there like a statue, frozen in her own cowardice. This was the last test, a final, desperate hope that some shred of their friendship, of loyalty, remained. She looked at Chloe, her eyes pleading for a word, a gesture, a flicker of dissent, anything. She received nothing. Chloe stared at a spot on the carpet, refusing to meet her gaze, her silence a deafening roar of complicity. In that moment, something inside Alara shifted. The hot, burning rage didn't just cool, it froze. It solidified into something hard and permanent, like diamond. The fight was gone, because she realized she had been fighting the wrong battle. She had come seeking justice, an admission, an apology. But you couldn't get blood from a stone, or truth from a hologram. She looked at Marcus, with his smug, self-satisfied cruelty. She looked at Chloe, with her pale, weak-willed terror, and for the first time she didn't see monsters. She saw insects. Alara stood up slowly. The tremor in her hands was gone. Her voice, when she spoke, was devoid of any emotion at all. It was the calm at the eye of a hurricane. "Thank you for the clarification, Marcus," she said. It wasn't a surrender. It was an acceptance of the terms of war. Without a glance back at Chloe, she turned and walked out of the office. She walked with a strange, new lightness, the weight of her misplaced faith and broken trust finally lifted. They thought they had crushed her. They thought they had put the tool back in the box. They had no idea they had just armed a weapon. The email from Human Resources was as impersonal as a foreclosure notice. Alara Vance was officially reassigned to the Legacy Systems Maintenance Division, effective immediately. Her new desk was in the building's sub-basement, a place where sunlight was a distant rumor and the air carried the metallic scent of old electronics and quiet despair. This was the corporate graveyard, the final, forgotten floor where employees were sent not to be fired, but to be erased. Her new colleagues were ghosts, men and women who had been with the company for decades, their ambitions worn down to a smooth, numb resignation. Her job was to maintain a payroll system written in a programming language that was ancient before she was born. It was an insult wrapped in a task, a punishment designed to be so soul-crushingly tedious that she would simply quit. But Alara did not quit. Something within her had fundamentally changed. The girl who had arrived in New York, full of naive dreams about meritocracy, was gone. The woman who had confronted Marcus Thorne, her voice shaking with rage and a desperate need for justice, was also gone. The person who sat in the flickering fluorescent gloom of the sub-basement was someone new. She was quiet, she was methodical, and she was patient. She performed her menial tasks with a chilling, robotic perfection, closing out troubled tickets in hours that her new colleagues would have taken weeks to complete. She spoke only when spoken to, her answers brief and precise. She became a ghost among ghosts. But while their silence was one of defeat, hers was the silence of a predator in a blind, waiting. The social exile was absolute. Former colleagues who had once praised her work now averted their eyes in the hallways. The few who dared to speak offered awkward, pitying condolences, as if she were suffering from a terminal illness. She ate lunch alone, reading technical manuals on her phone, her face an unreadable mask. Meanwhile, the ascent of Marcus and Chloe was swift and very public. An internal memo, complete with beaming corporate headshots, announced Marcus's promotion to Vice President of Global Innovation. A week later, another memo announced Chloe's appointment as Director of Strategic Marketing, reporting directly to him. They were the company's new power couple, celebrated in corporate newsletters for their visionary leadership on the game-changing Project Chimera. Alara read these announcements with the detached interest of an anthropologist studying a foreign tribe. Each promotion, each accolade, was not an insult. It was a data point, another piece of evidence she filed away in the cold, orderly archives of her mind. After 2 weeks in this corporate purgatory, the observation phase was complete. One evening she logged off her ancient terminal, left the sub-basement, and instead of taking the subway home to her small apartment, she hailed a taxi. The Carlisle, she said to the driver, naming a hotel on the Upper East Side. The cab moved from the stark modern canyons of the financial district to the stately, old-money elegance of a different New York, a world she had intentionally left behind. She didn't go into the hotel. She walked to an adjacent brownstone, a building whose polished brass plaque simply read, Covington, Hayes, and Associates. Arthur Covington was a man who seemed to be carved from the same aged mahogany as his desk. He was in his late 70s, with eyes that had seen the rise and fall of corporate empires, and a handshake that felt like a signed contract. He had been her father's best friend, his lawyer, and the executor of his estate. He was the only person in the world who knew the full story of Alara Vance. "Arthur," she said, her voice holding a warmth that no one at Aethelred had heard. "Miss Vance," he replied, a gentle smile in his eyes. "You look too much like your father when you're angry. I trust this isn't a social call." In the quiet of his book-lined office, over glasses of iced tea, she told him everything. She left out no detail. The genesis of Chimera, the promises, the lies, the theft, the confrontation, the final, cruel word, replaceable. Arthur listened without interruption, his expression hardening from grandfatherly concern to a cold, legal fury. When she finished, he was silent for a long moment. "Daniel Vance," he finally said. His voice, a low growl, would have burned that building to the ground. He stood, walked over to a massive, hidden safe behind a painting of a clipper ship, and retrieved a heavy, leather-bound portfolio. He placed it on the desk between them. "Your father was more than an investor in Aethelred, Alara. He was a founder. He and the other partners had a falling out decades ago. They wanted to build a corporation. He wanted to build a legacy, so he took a silent partnership, retaining a 35% stake in the company, the single largest individual shareholding. He opened the portfolio. He put the shares in a trust to be managed by this firm. He had one condition: the voting rights would remain with me, as his proxy, until your 30th birthday. He wanted you to make your own way, to build your own worth, without the shadow of his name. He always said, power is a prison until you've earned the key to your own cell. Well, you've earned it, Alara. Your birthday is next week." Alara stared at the documents, at the staggering numbers and legal clauses. All this time, she had been fighting for a seat at the table, never knowing she owned the table, the chairs, and a third of the room they were in. The plan that began to form in her mind was no longer about simple revenge. Marcus and Chloe were no longer the targets. They were merely the first dominoes to fall. This was about reclamation. Her father's company had rotted from the inside, becoming a place that valued parasites over creators. Her plan was not to sue for damages or intellectual property rights. That was the response of a victim. Her plan was to perform a hostile takeover from within. "What do you need?" Arthur asked, already knowing the answer. "Everything," Alara said, her voice now resonating with a power she was finally ready to claim. "I need you to make discreet inquiries with the other major shareholders. I need a full audit of Marcus Thorne's directorate. I need to know every weakness, every overspend, every failed project he's ever buried." She stood and looked out Arthur's window at the city below. From her desk in the sub-basement, she had been a ghost, haunting the periphery of the company. But a ghost can move through walls. A ghost can see things others cannot. "I'll handle the internal reconnaissance," she said, a chilling calm in her voice. "They may have put me in the basement, but they forgot something. The legacy systems. They're connected to everything." The quiet was over. The storm had gathered its clouds, its wind, its lightning. It was no longer a silent, brooding thing. It was a legal, financial, and technological force of nature, and it was about to make landfall on the 48th floor of Aethelred Corp. The foundation of Alara's plan was not destruction, but absolute control. An amateur, blinded by rage, would have planted a virus, a logic bomb that would have spectacularly wiped Chimera from the Aethelred servers. But that would have been a crime of passion, a messy act that would have also destroyed a part of herself. Alara's mind was now operating on a level of cold, crystalline logic. Chimera was her masterpiece. You do not slash your own painting to spite a thief who has stolen it. Instead, you embed a signature so deep within the canvas, so integral to its very fabric, that only the true artist can ever prove its authenticity. This signature had existed from the earliest days of the project. Ilara, ever the cautious architect, had always been aware that she was creating something of immense power and value. From that awareness, the ghost key was born. It was not a simple password or a backdoor. It was a fundamental component of Chimera's operating system, a digital heart that could not be bypassed. The version of Chimera that Marcus had been demonstrating to executives, the one that ran so flawlessly in simulations, was essentially a high-performance engine running in neutral. It could rev, it could roar, it could impress everyone with its potential, but it could not engage the gears. To connect to live global data streams, to integrate with Aethelred's financial systems, to execute a single real-world command, the system required a final, cryptographic handshake, a validation protocol that demanded a unique, dynamically generated, time-sensitive key, a key that was generated by a separate, external algorithm that existed on a single, encrypted drive currently locked in Arthur Covington's safe. This was the trap, and its genius lay in Marcus's greatest weakness, his profound and arrogant technical ignorance. Marcus was a master of the narrative. He could sell the sizzle of the steak better than anyone, but he had never bothered to learn how the cow was raised. He had read Ilara's executive summaries, her bullet points, her high-level overviews. But the hundreds of pages of dense technical documentation, the elegant intricacies of the system architecture, he had ignored all of it, dismissing it as the weeds. He saw the prompt for a final validation protocol in the system's boot sequence and assumed it was a standard, high-level security feature that his IT department would handle. He saw a lock, but in his hubris, he never once thought to ask who forged the key. Now, Ilara needed to make him, and the entire company, aware of this lock without revealing her hand. She needed to transform her secret failsafe into his public problem. From a secure laptop in Arthur's office, late one night when the city's towers were just a glittering constellation, she built her Trojan horse. It was not a piece of code, but a piece of communication. She carefully crafted an email, a masterpiece of bureaucratic impersonation. The sender was spoofed to appear as if it came from the Digital Asset Security Committee, DASC, a committee so plausibly boring and officious that no one would question its existence. The email was addressed to all department heads overseeing projects with a valuation of over $100 million. Its language was perfect corporate doublespeak. As part of our ongoing, enterprise-wide commitment to proactive asset security and in light of emerging global cybersecurity threats, it began. DASC is implementing a mandatory new activation protocol for all Tier 1 digital assets. Effective immediately, any such asset must be secured by a manual, non-networked cryptographic activation key prior to its full commercial deployment. Please liaise with your technical leads to confirm your project's compliance and report back to this committee by the end of the week. The email was a work of art. It created a problem and offered a solution, all while appearing to be a tedious, routine security update. Marcus received it the next morning. As Ilara predicted, he skimmed it, felt a flash of annoyance at the new layer of bureaucracy, and immediately forwarded it to the head of IT with a simple, delegating message. Please confirm Chimera is compliant with this. From her terminal in the sub-basement, Ilara had created a discrete network sniffer that allowed her to monitor certain internal email chains. She watched the Trojan horse enter the city walls. She saw the IT director assign the task to a senior technician. She saw the technician's reply an hour later, attached with a screenshot from Ilara's own documentation, the very section detailing the final validation protocol. Marcus, the IT director, wrote back, "Good news. It appears your team was ahead of the curve on this one. Project Chimera already has a multi-layer validation key built into its core architecture. It's one of the most robust systems I've ever seen. We are fully compliant." Ilara watched Marcus's reply pop up a few minutes later. It was addressed to the non-existent DASC, a proud, confident email. This is to confirm that Project Chimera is, and has been from its inception, fully compliant with the new security protocol. My team and I believe that security must be a foundational principle, not an afterthought. He had taken the bait. He had not only acknowledged the existence of the lock, but had publicly taken credit for it. He had walked into the cage, admired its craftsmanship, and then proudly pulled the door shut behind him. With the trap set, Alara spent her nights making the final preparations. The algorithm that generated the ghost key was her symphony. It was designed to be beautiful, complex, and unbreakable. The final key would be a 256-character string derived from 3 variables: the stock market's precise opening price on the morning of the board meeting, the exact server timestamp of the activation command down to the millisecond, and a private passphrase drawn from the last conversation she ever had with her father. It was a lock that only her history and her mind could open. Her work in the sub-basement continued, a perfect camouflage. To the world, she was a ghost in the machine, a forgotten employee in a corporate dungeon. But in reality, she was the secret master of the entire system, a patient strategist watching her opponent move his king into a checkmate of his own design. The official announcement arrived on a Monday morning, an all-company email from the CEO himself, Mr. Anderson. It was a masterpiece of corporate prose, filled with triumphant phrases about entering a new paradigm of innovation and unlocking unprecedented shareholder value. But stripped of its jargon, the message was simple. A special company-wide board meeting had been called for the following Friday. The agenda had only one item: the official unveiling and live activation of Project Chimera. The company's most powerful investors and the entire board of directors would be flying in from around the globe to witness the dawn of Aethelred's new era. The email ended by congratulating the visionary behind this monumental achievement, Marcus Thorne. For Marcus, the announcement was a coronation. His face was everywhere on the company's internal homepage, in a fawning interview for the corporate newsletter where he spoke eloquently of his vision. He walked the halls of the 48th floor, not as a director, but as a conquering hero. The pressure on him was immense, but he seemed to thrive on it, fueled by the intoxicating mix of adrenaline and adoration. He spent his days in back-to-back strategy sessions and his nights in the empty boardroom, rehearsing his presentation until it was flawless. He obsessed over every slide, every word, every dramatic pause. During his practice runs, the system would inevitably reach the final step and display the prompt, awaiting high-security validation key. He saw it every time. And every time, he dismissed it as a final, ceremonial step, a digital ribbon cutting to be handled by the IT department. He had asked them about it once, casually. The tech lead had confirmed, yes, the protocol requires a manual key generation on the day of activation. It's the ultimate security feature. Marcus had nodded, satisfied. The answer confirmed his belief that it was a technical formality, not a barrier. His ignorance was a suit of armor he wore with unshakable confidence. Chloe was his ever-present shadow, his chief lieutenant, her own career now inextricably linked to his soaring star. She was a whirlwind of activity, organizing press kits, coordinating with the board members' assistants, and ensuring every detail of the event was perfect. She moved with a new, sharp-edged authority. Once, her path nearly crossed with Alara's near the deserted cafeteria in the late afternoon. Chloe was on her phone, speaking in a loud, important voice, and she stopped dead when she saw the quiet figure from the sub-basement getting a cup of coffee. A flicker of something guilt, fear, annoyance crossed her face. She abruptly ended her call, turned, and walked away in the opposite direction without a word. Alara watched her go, her expression unchanged. She took a slow sip of her coffee, her gaze cold and steady. The ghost was used to being avoided. Down in the sub-basement, Alara's routine remained unaltered. She was an island of calm in the company's sea of excited anticipation. She continued her work on the ancient systems, her focus so absolute it was unsettling. Her colleagues had long since stopped trying to engage her in conversation. She was a quiet, efficient phantom who took no breaks and spoke in monosyllables. But her placid exterior was the perfect camouflage. While her hands were debugging forgotten code, her mind was waging a war. After her workday ended, her true work began. Most nights, she was at Arthur Covington's firm, in a secure conference room that had been converted into her private command center. Here, she was not the ghost from the basement, she was the general. Arthur had procured, through entirely legal channels, Marcus Thorne's complete personnel file and performance history. Ilara studied it with the dispassionate focus of a biologist examining a specimen under a microscope. She saw the pattern of his career, a trail of successful projects where the key technical contributors had all, curiously, left the company within 6 months of completion. He was not a builder. He was a serial hijacker of talent. Arthur, meanwhile, was having quiet, hypothetical conversations with other major shareholders, powerful figures who had long been dissatisfied with the company's stagnant leadership, but lacked the catalyst for a change. He spoke of a contingency, of a significant new stakeholder who would soon be making their presence known, one with a vision that honored the company's innovative roots. Back in her sub-basement sanctuary, Ilara was a phantom in her own systems. Her legacy access gave her a low-level view of the entire corporate network, a digital back alley that no one ever bothered to monitor. She could see the resource allocation for the upcoming presentation. She could see the frantic emails from the IT department as they prepared the servers. And she saw the official security memo distributed by the head of IT, reminding the presentation team that the activation of Chimera was contingent upon the successful input of the Vance Protocol Validation Key, a name the technicians had given it after its author in the documentation. They had named the lock after her, even as they handed the cage to Marcus. The irony was so profound it was almost beautiful. The night before the meeting, the Aethelred Tower was a beacon of nervous energy. On the 48th floor, Marcus Thorne stood alone in the grand boardroom, running through his presentation one last time. The city lights spread out before him like a kingdom awaiting its new ruler. He felt a surge of pure, unassailable triumph. Everything he had ever wanted was now just hours away. He was not just replaceable, he was inevitable. 20 miles away, in her small, quiet apartment, Ilara Vance was not rehearsing. Her work was done. The algorithm for the ghost key was complete, residing on its encrypted drive, waiting. The legal documents transferring her voting rights were signed and notarized, ready to be filed by Arthur at the precise moment of her choosing. She calmly laid out the clothes she would wear the next day. A sharply tailored suit of charcoal gray, a color that was neither black nor white, the color of steel and of storms. To anyone else, it was the eve of Marcus Thorne's greatest victory. But Ilara knew the truth. It was the eve of a public execution. The stage was set, the audience was seated, and the star of the show had no idea that the play was a tragedy, and he was the only one who didn't know the final, fatal line was his. The boardroom on the 48th floor was less a meeting space and more a cathedral of commerce. The long table, carved from a single piece of dark polished wood, reflected the city skyline like a still black lake. Seated around it were the titans of Aethelred Corp, board members whose collective net worth could rival the GDP of a small nation, and the company's most powerful C-suite executives. The air was heavy with the scent of money, power, and immense expectation. At the head of the table sat the CEO, Mr. Anderson, a man whose silence carried more weight than most people's speeches. All eyes were on the front of the room, on the man of the hour. Marcus Thorne was not just a director giving a presentation, he was a conductor stepping up to the podium. He exuded an aura of effortless command, his suit perfectly tailored, his smile a weapon of mass persuasion. He began to speak, and the room fell under his spell. His performance was flawless. He didn't just present data, he wove a narrative. He spoke of technological revolution, of market disruption, of a future where Aethelred was not just a player, but the undisputed king. He showcased Chimera's capabilities with a series of dazzling, pre-recorded demonstrations, each one more impressive than the last. The system predicted a dockworker strike in Rotterdam, rerouted a fleet of cargo ships to avoid a budding typhoon in the South China Sea, and optimized a client's entire supply chain, saving them a theoretical $400 million. The board members were no longer skeptical. They were enthralled. Marcus was not just selling a product. He was selling a glorious, profitable future. and he was its sole architect. He moved toward his crescendo, his voice resonating with practiced passion. "For too long, this company has reacted to the future," he declared, his gaze sweeping across the powerful faces in the room. "We have managed change, but we have not driven it. Chimera changes that. It is more than a platform. It is a prophecy engine, and it is the engine that will power our growth for the next century." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. Then he advanced to his final slide. It was stark, simple, and incredibly powerful. Against a black background, there was a single, glowing button with one word: activate. "And now, ladies and gentlemen," Marcus said, his voice dropping to a dramatic hush, "let's stop talking about the future. Let's bring it online." A wave of anticipatory applause rippled through the room. The investors leaned forward, their faces alight with excitement. This was the moment. The culmination of millions of dollars of investment and months of hype. With a confident flourish, Marcus clicked the button on his remote. On the massive screen at the front of the room, the button vanished, and a clean, elegant dialogue box appeared in its place. The text was simple, written in a crisp, sans serif font. "Project Chimera Commercial Activation. Please enter high-security validation key." A polite, expectant silence fell over the room. Marcus chuckled, a smooth, practiced sound. "Just the final security checkpoint, of course," he said, turning to the keyboard on the lectern. "Can't be too careful with the crown jewels." He confidently typed in the universal director-level administrative password, a password that gave him access to nearly every system in the company. He hit enter. A single line of red text appeared below the entry field. "Key invalid. Access denied." The smile on Marcus's face tightened almost imperceptibly. He cleared his throat. "My apologies." A slip of the finger. He typed the password again, this time more slowly, more deliberately. He hit enter. "Key invalid. Access denied." The silence in the room was no longer polite. It was thick, heavy, and uncomfortable. The board members exchanged confused glances. Marcus's confident demeanor began to fray at the edges. A fine sheen of sweat appeared on his forehead. He motioned frantically to the senior IT technician who was standing discreetly against the wall. The man hurried over, his face pale. "What is this?" Marcus hissed under his breath. "That's the Vance protocol key prompt, sir," the technician whispered, his voice trembling. "As per the DASC security memo, we don't have the key. The documentation says it's generated manually, off-network, for final sign-off." "Well, generate it," Marcus snapped. "We can't, sir," the technician stammered. "The protocol's author is the only one with the generation algorithm." Marcus felt a surge of pure, unadulterated panic. The faces of the investors, which had been so full of admiration just moments before, were now hardening into masks of impatience and doubt. His entire future was hanging on this single moment, and it was slipping through his fingers. He turned back to the lectern, his mind racing. He had to regain control of the narrative. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his voice a little too loud, a little too strained, "my sincerest apologies. It seems there has been a minor communication breakdown with our IT department. A small technical hiccup in preparing the final activation step. We'll have it sorted out in just a moment." He was trying to throw his own people under the bus, a classic corporate maneuver. It was then that Mr. Anderson, the CEO, finally spoke. He hadn't moved a muscle, but his voice cut through the tension in the room like a scalpel. "A hiccup? Mr. Thorne?" he asked, his tone dangerously calm. "I find that surprising. I have here a copy of an email you sent to the Digital Asset Security Committee, in which you personally confirmed that you were aware of this protocol and that Project Chimera was, and I quote, fully compliant from its inception. Are you now saying that confirmation was inaccurate?" The question was a perfectly aimed kill shot. It exposed Marcus not just as incompetent, but as a liar, and it did so using his own arrogant words against him. There was nowhere for him to hide. The IT technician subtly stepped away from him, leaving him completely isolated at the front of the room. The admiring eyes of the board were now the cold, hard eyes of a jury. The humming of the servers seemed to grow louder, filling the crushing silence. And in that moment, standing in the ruins of his own triumph, Marcus Thorne finally understood. This wasn't a glitch. This wasn't a technical error. This was a perfectly designed, flawlessly executed trap, and he was standing right in the center of it. The CEO's question hung in the boardroom like a death sentence. Marcus Thorne stood frozen, his face a mask of disbelief, the blood draining from it until it was the color of ash. His attempt to deflect had failed, his lie exposed by his own email. The silence was absolute, a crushing weight that pressed down on him from all sides. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He was a king whose castle had just dissolved into dust around him. At that precise moment, the grand doors at the back of the boardroom opened with a soft, expensive click. Two figures entered. The first was Arthur Covington, his presence exuding an aura of old-world power and unimpeachable legal authority. The second figure, walking calmly beside him, was Alara Vance. She was not the ghost from the sub-basement, the timid programmer with slumped shoulders. This woman stood tall, her gaze as sharp and clear as a shard of ice, her charcoal gray suit a declaration of war. Every head in the room turned. Marcus stared at her, his panic momentarily replaced by sheer, uncomprehending shock. It was Mr. Anderson, the CEO, who broke the silence, his voice calm, as if this was all part of the agenda. "Mr. Thorne, it appears you are having difficulty with the activation key," he said, his eyes fixed on Alara. "Fortuitously, I believe the individual with the authority to generate that key has just arrived." Arthur Covington stepped forward. "Good morning, ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice resonating with quiet power. "My name is Arthur Covington. My firm represents the Vance Trust, which, as you know, is the single largest shareholder of Athelred Corporation." A murmur went through the room. The Vance Trust was a legendary, almost mythical entity, a silent giant that had never before taken an active role. Arthur then gestured to the woman beside him. "And this," he announced, "is the Trust's sole beneficiary, and as of 9:30 this morning, its controlling stakeholder. Allow me to introduce Miss Alara Vance." If the first announcement was a tremor, this was the earthquake. The room was in stunned silence. Alara stepped forward, her eyes finding Marcus's across the long, polished table. Her voice, when she spoke, was not loud, but it commanded the attention of every person in the room. It was the voice of pure, cold clarity. "It seems you are having trouble activating my project," she said. The word "my" landed like a hammer blow. The Vance Protocol Validation Key is a security feature I designed from the inception of Chimera. Its purpose is to ensure that the system can only be brought online by its registered chief architect. You, Mr. Thorne, are not the chief architect. She paused, letting the truth of her statement settle over the room. You are a director who stole a completed work, put your name on it, and lied about its creation to this board. You promised me a promotion to Chief Technical Architect to coerce me into transferring the final administrative controls. A promise you obviously had no intention of keeping. This is absurd. Marcus finally stammered, his voice cracking. She's a disgruntled employee. This island. This is slander. Arthur Covington simply placed a sleek, leather-bound portfolio on the table. In this portfolio, he said calmly, you will find time-stamped server logs from the project's inception, a complete repository of Miss Vance's source code, and copies of Mr. Pleat Thorne's emails to her detailing the fraudulent offer. The evidence is conclusive. It was over. Marcus looked from the portfolio to Arthur's ironclad expression, to the CEO's stony face, and finally, to Alara. In her eyes, he saw no anger, no hatred. He saw something far worse, indifference. The look one gives to something that is no longer relevant. Mr. Anderson stood up, his authority absolute. Marcus Thorne, he said, his voice leaving no room for appeal. You are terminated from Athelred Corporation, effective immediately. Please leave your company identification and laptop on the table. Security will escort you from the premises. As two uniformed guards entered the room, the CEO's gaze shifted to the side, to where Chloe Dubois sat, frozen in terror. He didn't even need to consult with Alara. He simply looked at Chloe, his expression one of deep disappointment. "You as well, Miss Dubois. Your position is also terminated." Chloe crumpled in her chair, a silent, pathetic casualty of her own weak-willed betrayal. As Marcus was being led out, a broken man stripped of all his power and prestige, Alara walked to the lectern. She pulled out her personal phone, and on its screen was a complex, 256-character string of text. She calmly typed it into the keyboard. On the large screen, the dialog box vanished, and the words changed. Key validated. Welcome, Architect. Project Chimera is now live. The system came to life, its interface glowing, its data streams flowing. She had not only proven her ownership, she had demonstrated her mastery. The narrator's voice begins to speak, calm and measured, over the image of a stunned but impressed boardroom. They had made a fatal error, one born of arrogance and greed. They looked at Alara Vance and saw a tool, a cog in the machine, something to be used and then discarded. They thought she was replaceable, but they failed to understand that she was not a cog in the machine at all. She was the ghost. She was the architect, and she was the owner. The story ends here, but the lesson is timeless. In the quiet corridors of power and in the forgotten basements of ambition, one truth remains absolute. Never, ever, underestimate the silence of a person who has endured for too long. For when they finally choose to speak, their voice will not ask for justice. It will be the sound of justice itself being executed. In the end, Alara Vance didn't just get her revenge. She took back her company, she reclaimed her father's legacy, and she rewrote the definition of the word replaceable. Justice comes in many forms. Sometimes it is loud and righteous, but other times it is quiet, precise, and coded into the heart of a system. Join us next time for the story of a loyal assistant who, after being cast aside, discovers a secret ledger that holds the key to bringing down an entire corporate empire. We'll see you then. With the successful transfer and securing of Project Chimera, your specialized role on the project has now concluded. Thank you for your contributions during the development phase. HR will be in contact with you shortly to discuss your reassignment to the Legacy Systems division. She read it once, then twice. The words swam before her eyes. Concluded. Reassignment. Legacy Systems. Legacy Systems was the corporate graveyard. It was where they sent obsolete employees to wait for retirement or resignation. The promise, the throne, the future, it had all been an elaborate, cruel lie. The gilded cage had served its purpose. She had built his masterpiece, handed him the keys, and he had thanked her by locking her in the basement. Standing there, invisible amidst the morning rush of people building their own dreams, Alara Vance finally understood. The night of the long knives wasn't just a metaphor. It was a quiet dinner for three, followed by a 3-sentence email. The purge was complete.